You don't have to get on WhatsApp. Just so you know, we'll be also interpreting everything in Spanish here. So you'll hear Spanish directly here on Zoom. If you prefer to do from Spanish to ASL.
Okay.
We're live now, ladies. Just so you know, we're live on Facebook now.
Good evening, everyone. We'll be starting here shortly.
Buenas noches a todos. Vamos a empezar en unos momentos.
And while we're starting, everybody can put their names and where they're calling from in the chat.
Y mientras comenzamos, por favor, todas las personas pueden poner sus nombres y de dónde están llamando en el chat.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see everyone joining in. We have just waiting for a few more people, and we'll be getting started here in 1 more minute.
Buenas noches a todos. Estamos esperando un par de minutos más y ya comenzamos.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bineshi and welcome this evening for the Indigenous Environmental Network Feminism and Indigenous Women webinar. This webinar is about women, agriculture, and climate change. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And before we get all the way started, I would like to offer a prayer so that we can start this panel in a good way. Gohantana, I ask you to look upon us this evening, to bless us, to keep our minds open and willing to share and learn from one another, that you look upon all of the families of those on the panel and those who have joined us and those who are supporting us, that you look upon our families at home and keep people well and safe, and that you continue to look out for our people and keep us strong and hopeful and joyful and healthy. Gohantana, I ask you these things as a humble human being, and I ask you to continue to bless us and thank you for all of the blessings you have given us. And Gohantana, I thank you for all of the knowledge, the hopes and dreams and teachings that each of the panelists will be sharing with us this evening. I thank you for blessing us with their presence here. Thank you. I would like to, again, I know people are joining as we're going. This is the Indigenous Environmental Network webinar series on feminisms and Indigenous women. This particular one is about women, agriculture, and climate change. And I'm going to pass it on. We these panels have been international in scope, and so it's important for us to make sure that we have language justice as part of that. And I would like to pass on to our translation team to share with us some logistics about finding the right language to connect with.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Catalina y acá mi compañera intérprete Silvia. Hello, everyone. My name is Catalina, and my co-interpreter here is Silvia. We're going to be interpreting in English and Spanish and English. Vamos a estar interpretando en español, inglés y inglés español. También tenemos acá interpretación del lenguaje de señas. We also have Spanish ASL, American Sign Language. And we want to, of course, honor all of our languages, all the ways of speaking. We know that language is intimately connected to who we are and our dreams and our feminisms. Así que queremos honrar también todos nuestros idiomas, todas las maneras en las que hablamos. Sabemos que los idiomas están íntimamente conectados con quienes somos y con los feminismos. So the way that interpretation is going to work is for those who are in the Zoom, you'll have to select a language channel, whether it's English or Spanish. You'll see a globe that says interpretation in the bottom of the screen. For those who are listening to the live stream in English, if that's your preference, you're fine. But for those who want to hear in Spanish, you'll have to come to the Zoom, and you're going to see a link to the Zoom in the chat of the live stream. Entonces, para las personas que quieran participar en español y escuchar en español, van a ver un enlace en el chat del live stream. Si están en el live stream en este momento, en la transmisión en vivo, por favor vayan al Zoom directamente para poder acceder a la interpretación al español. Van a hacer clic en el globo que dice interpretación en la parte inferior de su pantalla y seleccionar canal español. Cualquier problema técnico, por favor nos dejan saber. Pueden escribir en el chat. Any issues with the interpretation for those who are in the Zoom, please let us know and send a message to the chat. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much.
So my name is Bineshi Albert. I'm Anishinaabe and Yuchi. I am the movement building coordinator with the Indigenous Environmental Network. Once again, welcome to everyone. Seems we have folks all the way as far as Guatemala and Canada, all across the US. And so it's very good to see all of the people sharing where they're from. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have 3 incredible women who are going to be sharing with us about their work and the work of women in agriculture. And I'm very excited to facilitate this panel with these incredible women. We have Electa Hare Redcorn, who is joining us from Oklahoma, Kara Boyd, who is joining us from North Carolina, and Milvian Aspuac. I'm sure I said your last name wrong. I was, who is joining us from Guatemala. And so we are gonna have a few questions for them, but we're gonna give them some time to introduce themselves specifically. And so first joining us, I would like to pass the baton or the mic to Electa to share a little bit about herself, where she's from, her work, and her community.
Dadachikstehu, Bineshi, thank you. Noah, Dadasa Badiskatadi Da'u, Dadasa Electa Hare Redcorn. I am a member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. We're situated in Oklahoma today. We're originally from the Platte, Loup, and Republic Rivers of Nebraska. And I and my partner live in Osage Nation territory, Wajaji territory, also in Oklahoma today. We are raising 3 daughters. And since 2012, I have been a supportive volunteer and assistant seed keeper for the Pawnee Seed Preservation Project. We're still working on what you would call our mission statement, but one of the core things that we always think about is our relationship with Mother Corn. And knowing that there's a relationship with Mother Corn, we also understand that there's a relationship with the water, the soil, and the other animals that live alongside us in a sense of co-management. Because we live in Oklahoma, it's a very red state. And so we have a lot of work to do in terms of agriculture and climate education and seed literacy, but we're on our way. And I just wanted to share a mission statement that we're working on for the seed project, because I think it conveys what we're trying to do and the work that we've been involved in. So we're trying to revitalize the strength and spiritual agricultural practices of the Pawnee people, Pawnee Akidahu, by bridging a culture of health through stewardship of traditional nutritional seed. At first I had put resources, but we can't really look at them as resources. It's more than that. And so we do this because Mother Corn's livelihood is cultural, spiritual, and ecological livelihood.
Sorry, thank you, Electa. Do you want to share a little bit more about the work of your community and what agriculture means to you and the role of women with agriculture in the community?
Thank you. So yes, Pawnee people are basically represented as 4 bands of our nation. And these are bands that we recognized and affiliated with as family systems up along the Platte, Loop, and Republic rivers. So we still have some treaty rights on the Platte River up there in Nebraska. And we are working to help our community as it is today, our contemporary community, recall, have seed memory for some of our traditional spiritual practices and agricultural practices that we would have practiced when we lived along the Platte, Loop, and Republic rivers. Many of us feel very disconnected from our food system or have zero access to quality, nutritious foods. So a really huge part of our culture and our community are some of the foods that we put on the table for our relatives and guests. This could be at ceremonial functions or funerals or other community functions. But the work that we're trying to do with our community, we're actually going from a 2-person stepping forward to help perpetuate what seed preservation looks like for our Pawnee people. We're trying to build that culture of health by showing others and having others join us in the fold of this is relational work. That we also are deeply engaged in agricultural biodiversity. And so that takes a lot of reteaching and relearning for our community. As we have 1 grocery store in our hometown right by a river, but there are also sunchokes and other things, other plant beings that depend on the sun, depend on that healthy water, depend on a healthy sense of climate to endure. And so we're just really trying to reconnect our people with some of the foods we may have ate along our waterways in previous generations. And we know we're going in the right direction because our elders about 20 years ago were asking where our Pawnee corn, where our Pawnee seed, where our Pawnee foods were. And they remembered preparing that as a community when they were younger. So it is our hope that the work that we're doing will amplify the voice of Mother Corn. And I'm encouraged in that because our Business Council president today, but also one of the long-term Native American Rights Fund attorneys, Walter Echohawk, he actually recently said, we have to be aggressive for Mother Corn. And he didn't even have to explain why. I understood why, but I think it's our role as seed keepers to explain that in a loving way, in a tender way, and in a strong way, that when we protect Mother Corn and the seeds and the prayers that go with it are always protecting us. And so it just puts us in a closer relationship with our environmental network. And that includes 4-leggeds, that includes the rooted things, the sun, the stars, which guided our cosmology and our planting and our decision-making in the past. So I think we're well on our way. We've got good footing going, and it's just going to take not just community buy-in, but regional buy-in, and also feminine leadership in these positions to make these decisions in our region and help us educate others. So thank you for that. Thank you for letting me expand.
Thank you for sharing that. You've given a sort of a lot for us to think about going forward. The ideas of providing for community, protection of the seeds and of the corn, and of the leadership of women in that protection, and also bringing those back. So I thank you for sharing that. I want to move and invite Milvian. Milvian Aspuac. She will pronounce it much better than I can, who is joining us from Guatemala, one of our dear sisters in the work and the struggle. And it's an honor to have her join us in this panel today. So Milvian, will you introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about the work that you are doing there in the community and agriculture? And folks should, on the Zoom, should be selecting English if you haven't done that already, so that you can hear. One moment. Okay.
My name is Milvian Aspuac. I am a Mayan Kaqchikel woman from the municipality of Santiago, Zacatepeque of Guatemala country. I am grateful to this invitation. I am grateful to IAN so that I could share some of the ideas and to talk about the work that we do in my community. I am a mother of 3 kids. I am a weaver, I'm an agriculture worker, I'm a therapist from our ancestral medicine. I am part of Colectivo Colibri, and I am part of the national movement of Mayan weavers in Guatemala. Right now, I have the opportunity to be the executive director of Mujeres de AFEDES. It's an organization of women, Indigenous women, that is working for life in its plenitude, promoting harmony and equilibrium in life by recovering our memory and our identity, our science, our knowledge. And we are building ourselves as political subjects, and also
we're not hearing the Spanish for those who need to hear Spanish
of our peoples. We bring a philosophy that, espérate un segundito, parece que no están escuchando. This has represented to be able to have a process of recuperation of historical memory so that we can understand the ills, the problems, the issues, and the oppressions that we're living through. Our analysis has come from recognizing ourselves, first of all, as political subjects and as subjects of rights, where we analyze the issues, the problems that we're confronting from those ills that we're feeling as women, and also from the fact that that oppression affects our life. That's where we begin our analysis. And the fact that we are racialized women, that racism, classism has affected our life. There's an assimilation of our ways of life. And this has made us really sit down and be able to reflect about the different issues and problems that we're facing. And from there, be able to decide what are the actions we're going to take so that we can live in plenitude, in wholesome well-being. And we work on 3 areas. The first one is our body, our physical autonomy as women. For us, it's really important to really look at that human territory, our body and our territory, our mind. We think that to be able to transform our practices and our ways of life, we first need to transform our thinking, and that means that we need to take time to reflect and to do political education as well, because that's going to help us have a lens to be able to interpret what is the situation that we're living through as Indigenous women, recover our memory, our historical memory. We need to be able to identify our own roots, our own knowledge as Indigenous peoples, as Indigenous women, who has been those women that have come before us, and what are the actions that they have done so that in this moment, weaving still exists, agriculture still exists, ancestral medicine still exists. What did they do so that this could be alive? And we recognize those fights, those struggles from them that have allowed us to exist here and resist. And now, what do we have to do now so that we can bring those knowledges and all of that to the following generation? So this is something that's fundamental for us. We know that we need to be able to make our own decisions of what we want to feel, do, think. So this is fundamental for us to really be able to challenge all these all these ideas of what it means to be women. And this is how we center ourselves and what it is to be women and how we're going to continue to walk. Of course, the reclaiming of our ancestral medicine, food sovereignty. I think that it's important to take care of nature and be able to act in a reciprocal way with nature, because she takes care of us and we also have to take care of her. That's a very important part for us. This is harmony, that principle of harmony, reciprocity that we are practicing every day. And also take to the public sphere, to the public institutions, what are the proposals that we're bringing to be able to defend our knowledge, to defend our weaving, our knowledge, and continue to defend what we bring. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Milvian. You bring up some important points, particularly around, what the work of agriculture has to also do with territory and our access to traditional territories as Indigenous peoples, around culture and the cultural learning, and what does that mean for our food and where we get our food, and then about the relationship with nature, the relationship with Mother Earth. So I thank you for bringing that on for us. As we go through, we have one more panelist, and just for the attendees to know, we'll also be getting into some questions. So if people want to add questions in the chat or on Facebook, we might not be able to get to all the questions, but we're going to do our best to engage in some dialogue with the 3 experts that we have on the panel this evening. So I'm moving north to, and a bit east to have Kara Brewer Boyd join us. And Kara, if you will, introduce yourself, your community, and a little bit about the work, and particularly what it means for women in agriculture.
Thank you, Bineshi. Tanake, Tanedo, Mayat, Kara. Hello, how are you? My name is Kara. I'm an enrolled member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. We are a non-reservated tribe. We're also non-federally recognized historically. although we have a relationship with the federal government. We have the Lumbee Act of 1956, which states that we're an Indian, we're a tribe. And when you get down to the very last sentence, it says, however, because you're Lumbee, you're not entitled to any benefits any other Indian receives because of Indian status. And so I'm definitely a warrior, social justice advocate. And my husband, Dr. John Boyd, is the founder and president of the National Black Farmers Association. And we had been working on the Black farmers and the NRA Black farmers discrimination case against USDA. He also worked very hard on the Kaqchikel case, which was the Native American discrimination case against USDA. And when I began to work on that issue, we saw a lot of injustice with the farmers and with the programs and services that were at USDA. And after the settlement, there was roughly about half the money was still left over. And we just didn't see that that was right for those farmers who didn't get a chance to apply within the claims period, not to have a second chance to file an application, because the Black farmers had 83,000 late filers and they got a second round of applications. And they also got more money. They had no money left over. So that's where a lot of my advocacy work for Indigenous Native American farmers began, when we founded the Association of American Indian Farmers. And what's different about the Association of American Indian Farmers, it's for federally recognized, state recognized, non-recognized Indigenous people on and off the reservation. And we really work and advocate to get access to land, capital, and resources, with priority focuses on food safety, food sovereignty, and just healthy access around food and affordability and a clean environment. So really have been working very hard to bring justice, not only food justice, but also gender justice to the world of agriculture, because oftentimes women are underrepresented and they're underserved. They're also considered socially disadvantaged within the programs at USDA. So lots of work there for women, but also for Native Americans.
Thank you. Thank you, Kara. You bring up some points around, particularly around the relationship of Indigenous people and tribes to government and to the state, and what it means for, sometimes to have to navigate those systems to protect our communities and our food systems. So thank you for offering and sharing that. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and hopefully we can sort of get into a bit of a discussion and have each of you share with us a little bit deeper on some areas. So one question I want to ask, this webinar series is about Indigenous feminisms with an S, because we understand that means different things for different people. So I wanted to ask each of you if you would share what that means to you, Indigenous feminisms, and how you feel like it's relevant to the work around agriculture or food systems. And I would like to invite Milvian to start us off with that.
Okay. From our organization, for us, feminism is one of the political horizons that the feminists have proposed. It's a proposal for struggle. We identify as oppression, patriarchy, and capitalism. It is a fight that as Indigenous women we greet, we recognize, and sometimes we find each other in it. We are in this moment in a process of analysis and reflection as Indigenous women, from our territory, from my territory. In this way, we are asking ourselves, are we feminists? Are we not feminists? What does feminism mean? Is it our priority to tag ourselves under this umbrella of feminism? What does that mean? And this process brings each time more and more questions. And there's a series of responses to those questions, but we're talking as Indigenous women about that, about feminism. Feminism has always existed. Our mothers have carried it. What has happened before with us? So from that understanding, we have realized that the feminist movement tends to separate us sometimes, separate women from our community, from the collective. And for us, it's very important for women, along with men in the movement, it's important for us to go out together to defend our territory, to defend the water. And depending on the feminist currents and waves, sometimes there's the questioning of what are we going to do with men? Are they still chauvinistic? And for us, we are in a struggle of defending our rights and building ourselves as political subjects. That doesn't mean that we are going to separate ourselves from those collective struggles and fights that we have in our communities. In this way, we don't catalog ourselves as feminists necessarily, because we do think that there's a freedom in deciding what we want, who do we want to be, how do we want to name ourselves. But what's the most important part is how we act in community. We cannot talk about freedom and liberty if we are oppressing others, or if we are allowing others to oppress us. We cannot talk about freedom and to emancipate ourselves from patriarchy and classism if we're not questioning racism that exists. So there's a series of questions that we have internally and of our own self-reflection, and we continue to work on these. But we also continue to recover our knowledge, strengthening as Indigenous women, and to recognizing our history. There's so much work to do there. That's feminism? Well, I don't know. But it is a struggle. It is a fight that we do carry. And it's something that we are doing. And I don't think that necessarily we need to be cataloged under this name to have our work recognized. We do recognize the fight that our ancestors have carried, and it's important to continue to weave all of this and to continue to build political horizons where we feel that we are part of and called into. So this is not a struggle to divide each other or to divide us as feminists, or that we are not feminists. I think horizontality needs to exist among us. That's what we ask. Okay, I know I'm done with time.
Thank you, Milvian. There's a lot of things to unpack with the question, which is why we want to ask everyone like just where they're at with this. So I'm gonna ask Kara to give us your thinking about this. What does feminism, Indigenous feminisms, mean to you? How do you relate to it? And what does it have to do with agriculture or food systems?
Well, to me, if I look back at the dictionary definition of feminism, the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality of the sexes. And most people, when they generally think of farmers, they think of men. But in the Indigenous world, most farmers were women. We were the stewards and caretakers of the land. We were the planters and the gatherers, and preparing the foods for the winter. And so it's kind of a superiority conflict complex sometimes. And looking back through time, through colonization, how the ownership of land really changed the roles of women within agriculture, within indigenous communities. Within our own community, land would be transferred to the sons and not to the daughters, because they felt that when the daughters married, they could go live with their husbands and they would, have that land. And so as Indigenous women, I think we need to look back at that and making sure that we're taking care of our daughters. We see a lot of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I think even within the farmers, the stewards, and the caretakers, looking at feminism is that, it is protection, it's advocacy, saying that women are not a weaker sex. We may have different roles and different characteristics, but we should have equality and we should be treated equally.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting that we have to think about what was here before and what did our systems look like. So I thank you for sharing that about the role of women as farmers. Electa, what do you have to say about this? What does Indigenous feminisms mean to you? How do you relate to it, and how does it relate to agriculture?
Thank you. And I'm just really blown away by the strong voices that you brought to this panel tonight. And I'm really appreciative at this time in my life, my career, and my journey that I can reflect on these things with you. So thank you for bringing up these questions. I think one of the best ways I could convey how I feel about Indigenous feminism is that it's inclusive of all of the lifespan from conception to birth, that breastfeeding nursing period, raising the children up to their teen years, them establishing their own identities as Indigenous women. I like that when we think about Indigenous women and Indigenous native agriculture, we do not have to look at it in terms of dominion, as Kara was saying. We don't have to look at it as dominion over a seed, dominion over a waterway, dominion over another's way of life. I have a 5-year-old, so I'm trying to do my best. But honestly, just moving away from that spirit of dominion, even in our feminist practices, our different movements that we either attach ourselves to or become attached to because of passions that we have. I remember walking in DC in 2016 and seeing some of your faces there. And I just traveled with a group of women. And what I remember the most from that trip is we were saying strong hearts to the front. We wanted to represent and be strong and have our voices be heard. But even those that some may consider weak of heart, of mind, maybe they've been through trauma. We can't forget those voices either, because all of those voices make up our fields and our caretakers of seeds. So I think I bring that angle of recognizing trauma and things that have impacted our sobriety and our culture at this point in time and in our lives. I just think it's really important that we don't put ourselves in a state of dominion over others, and that we do think of that relational way of being in terms of feminism and agriculture. I didn't mention, but as of this month, the end of this month, I'm helping my home nation, Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma, develop a division of agriculture. And that is going to be a move that will hopefully bring our seed keeping movement and some of the modern agricultural practices together. And I know that there will be times when views will butt heads because like I said earlier, we're in Oklahoma.
It's all okay. Well, our whole families are included and should be included in these discussions. So, hi, Munchkin.
Yeah, I didn't mention earlier that we're in quarantine, me and my girls. So we're just trapped in the house. So we're doing our best.
Yes, no apologies necessary. This work includes our families, and we do it because of our families. So thank you for sharing your families with us. So I wanted to sort of dig in. There's a lot of threads and themes that are coming up as hearing each of you share. And I wanted to ask a question about challenges, and particularly what challenges are your communities facing because of climate change? What has climate change done to your farming and your ability to farm? And Kara, I wanted to see if you would start us off.
Yes, my tribe is located in North Carolina. So on the East Coast, we've seen more increased strength in our hurricanes. Our storms seem to be more violent, lots more flooding and devastation. And also we've had extreme drought. And so, you know, it's not good to have too much rain. It's not good to have too much heat, too much dryness. So actually we see, like within our soybean crop, that we may have to start irrigating certain crops that we traditionally have not irrigated before. And we've also noted in our seasons being able to plant a little later and could get a little more growth. And so with our climate change, that's really kind of what we're seeing is a little bit warmer seasons, changes in the seasons when they're coming, when they're stopping. And so the impact is there. And it's more of changes within the environment with extremes where we haven't traditionally been so impacted that now we are seeing those impacts and more strain on our natural resources.
Thank you. Electa, what kind of impact is climate change having on farming in your community?
Sure. Well, I think that with the natural cycle of seasons, there's always going to be a little bit of chaos. You think about weather in Oklahoma, and we've got tornadoes, Tornado Alley. We have a history of damaging and abusing our soils. Going back to the Great Depression era of, I see your face, Bineshi, and I appreciate that, of farmers and ranchers and that way of life and planting, monocrops, not a very different variety of crops that make up our commodity food system. And so when a lot of farmers and ranchers and agriculturalists today are drawn to the things that will go into the commodity food system, then I think it detracts from agricultural biodiversity. And I think some of our learning and growing related to being in relation to the climate changes, because those three top crops, the soybeans, wheat, and corn for feed, these things that you see as the top crops in our states, maybe just here in Oklahoma for sure, you see them as being more valued. And when the reality is that the way that we plant and garden as Indigenous women, there are what you call value added products. And that's just not in the way we grow them, but the way we process them as well. The way we utilize energy sources as well. And the way that we would then distribute them to our people. And so I think that modern agriculture is still definitely impacting climate change as we know it. And when a Pawnee farmer and his family raise watermelons and squash and try corn for the first time in 20 years in their family, you see they'll come to me with, when do we plant the fall garden? When do we get ready for this next season? And honestly, I cannot give them a straight answer because I think we need to pay more attention to climate change and kind of document for ourselves, as Em had said earlier, we need to document for ourselves these processes. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Electa. Milvian, you're much further south than most of the panelists. How is climate change impacting farming in your community?
Yes, of course, we don't have tornadoes, right? But we have some hurricanes that are impacting us, but we are missing rains. In the last 3 years, the amount of rain has decreased considerably. There are more droughts than before, and that doesn't contribute to the food, to grow the basic food staples that are needed for the families. The territory that we have for planting is really small. Therefore, when the droughts come and when there is a lot of rain, the impact is really big because the crops are not there. So we have food insecurity right away. At the end of the 80s, here they changed the self-sufficient agriculture for products for exportation. And this kind of agriculture needed that the diversity of the field would be removed, so we could then make space for monocultives. And that affected a lot the planting of food. We also got more insects that became plagues, and it started to affect the cycle of the rain, and the agricultural calendar began changing, and little by little it's getting worse. The climate is getting worse, the agricultural calendar is changing, and it is making people to stop planting and start looking for work in the factories or in other things, and that puts at risk food security and food sovereignty for the community. So the work that we're doing is to recover those practices, those agricultural practices from the families, diversifying the cultivation in the different fields so we can minimize the effects of impacts of climate change. And these practices can help us a bit, but they are not really stopping what the world and the transnational corporations and the food companies are doing and whatever they are generating for themselves. So it is important that the countries start changing their policies, and the transnational corporations should be more conscious about what they are doing, how they are damaging ecosystems, the diversity that exists in our own countries. And in that sense, this year we think that we've been blessed. Why? Because families we are just producing what we can produce in our fields, which is a good thing. We thought that the drought was going to be repeating this year, but it didn't happen like that. I think the universe is loving us right now. And this year, the agricultural calendar is normal, and we still have some rains coming, and we did have some drought for 2 weeks, and then the rain came back again. So we are really very grateful with the universe, because this year we can plant better than last year. But that doesn't mean that, well, we need to review our practices. We have to take care of the land. We have to take care of the waters, because last year the wells decreased. The amount of water went down. The rivers are also growing smaller, and these are vital elements for all of us, and that tells us that we have to do something about it. Otherwise, we're going to be disappearing as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow, there's a lot to sort of think about with each of the responses that you have given. Yeah, I'm curious. I asked this question about climate change, and I think a couple of you started to share this some, which was like, what is the greatest harm to traditional food systems or traditional farming? What is the greatest harm that you're experiencing right now? And yes, I asked a question about climate change, but maybe the harm is something else. So, Kara?
Yes, our sister Louise Benali out in Dene, Black Mesa, she shared with me, and she wanted me to share with all of you that they had beautiful plants this year, but they didn't produce any fruit. There were no vegetables on the plants, and that was very alarming to them. They had, you know, beautiful plants, but there was no food. And so that was an extreme. And I can say, like here in North Carolina with me, I know like with our tomatoes, if the temperature reaches, you know, over 100 degrees, they stop bearing, you know, with the pollination. So I think that that's what we're going to have to look at is with plant evolution, and how with climate change, and we're begin to go into, like here in North Carolina, we're almost in a subtropic zone at times. And my mother would tell me as a young girl growing up that they were told that it would be like Florida at some time. And, you know, it gets hot here, and I'm thinking, you know, maybe the elders knew what was happening, that they could see the change. And so I think that we have to look back in order for us to look forward. So I think for us to be able to really see the impact of the change, we need to take that lens and look back over the past couple of decades, compare it with what we're seeing now, and do that forecast, do that projection, looking forward and coming up with a strategy for these future generations. So I think that that's kind of the harm where we're seeing it, is that maybe we're not, you know, looking and strategizing as we're seeing the change happen. And they're saying we only have these many years left. And if we don't change our behavior with the ozone and our carbon footprint, you know, that we have to be more mindful of what it is that we're doing, the role and the contribution that we're having with the environment and with Mother Earth.
Thank you, Kara. Electa, you mentioned like monocrops being a threat, and, you know, soil, but what is, you know, from your view, what is the greatest threat that you're seeing in terms of traditional farming?
Most likely human ignorance as it pertains to ignoring or disrespecting Indigenous value systems. That's a short answer. But I honestly, like, I just came from, we talked about USDA earlier, and Keep Siegel and some of the things that they had done to keep brown and black farmers away from the resources that we would use to be successful in this current system. I worked for Intertribal Agriculture Council until last month, and I love that family, that network, you know, the work that they're doing related to like farm bill issues, which also include environmental issues. But one thing that I would add to that group would be possibly an Indigenous Environmental Network thread or a group on their Mighty Network. So we had a Mighty Network where we shared resources, and I think that that ignorance and that lack of awareness and thinking that maybe one way or the Dominion way is the only way to go is the most harmful presence of climate change, because it's indicative of the environmental climate, but it's indicative of our educational climate. You know, it's indicative of many things. And I think the more conversations we can have like this with both men farmers today and their sons and their daughters present, the better off we'll be. So we're headed in, like you said, we don't have a lot of time to be able to fix this, but with our knowledge systems, I think that we can continue to plan out futures for our young girls and how they'll be planting in the future. But we do have to coordinate and organize and change things the way they are right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Milvian, you shared a couple of pieces, particularly around access to land and what that means for the government. And I asked this question about climate change, but what is, you know, what are you seeing as the greatest threat to traditional farming in your community, or what's causing the greatest harm?
One of the issues is the dispossession of our land because of companies companies in Guatemala, in the Kaqchi region. They are displacing many communities from their territory, from their land. So this is a very serious issue, and it's unfortunate that it continues. We've already lived displacement after displacement, dispossession after dispossession. This is a very grave issue. We're also very worried about the fact that the bees are disappearing. Some of the varieties of bees are disappearing. There's one called doncella that there's less and less of, and also another one is like Apis mellifera, but without the stinger. So it's not the same as the doncella, but that's something that's worrying us a lot, because we would go to the forest. When we would go to the forest, we would see so many bees. And now we're seeing them disappear because there's urbanization in many of our territories, and there's a lack of water. So all of these affects the ecosystem itself, and especially the pollinators that are so important in our territories. And I think that this is one of the effects of climate change, a very grave effect, but also because of some of the malpractice from agricultural system, companies with fertilizers and other things. And one of the things that we do as indigenous community, we plant flowers or plants that attract the pollinators. We know that it's important for us to keep and guard their life, because by doing that, we're also keeping and guarding our own life and our plants. So the struggles of indigenous people to protect their territory, to avoid more dispossession, these are not usually non-public fights and resistance. Many times the state tries to visibilize it, but this is something that we're facing as indigenous communities here.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm seeing a couple of questions pop up, and so from the chat, I'm going to see if we can get to a couple of these questions, and maybe not everybody will answer all of them, but if you feel so moved to answer, you can answer them. What would be one favorite conversation you choose to have with children in relationship to body, earth, and community care? Anybody would like to answer that?
I guess I could say, take some, leave some, always be some. And the fact, for community, even for our bodies, for our own personal care, sometimes we give everything and we don't save anything for ourselves. We give everything to the community, or we give everything to another person in a relationship. So I think that that's a good motto for the world, for our communities, and for ourselves, and for the environment. Take some, leave some, always be some. And for the plant kingdom, we can't go out and harvest everything. We have to leave some for the next generation. We have to leave some for the animals. And when we begin to have that mentality where we care and we're related to each other, I think that that's what is going to resonate with the next generations, with the young ones, because they can feel and sense that.
Either of you want to share too? Milvian?
Yes, something that for me is very important and exciting to share with my kids, with other children in my community. For them, it's easier to understand that the universe is alive, that the plants feel, that the water has a spirit, that mountains do as well. And the connection with girls and boys, with children, with these very vital elements is so important, and they're so sensitive to that already. And the importance of being able to be connected with the universe, because we are in that universe that is alive, and us as elements, we are also there. And we have the responsibility and co-responsibility to take care, to be co-responsible with Earth and nature, and the importance of planting a tree. Because we can say many words, we can share many words, but what does the practice look like? To take care of a plant, to plant a tree, that's something that's so important. And with that, we could give our children a lot, and that the solutions exist in the earth. We don't have, all we need is to have our clothing, our food, to be healthy, and not lose that connection to the elements. That's why it's so important to bless also the rain, to be grateful to the rain, to be grateful to our grandfather, the sun, for bringing us the light, to be able to connect with these vital elements is something so important, and to be able to transfer it to our children. That's also important.
Thank you. Electa, I'm going to come to you, and you're welcome to answer that previous question, but I also want to ask this question, which is, and come around to see if anybody else has to have offering too, is, do any of you have plans of how to preserve information that is coming from elders? And how are we sharing and capturing that information, or if there's already plans or work that is already happening in place, if you would share some of that.
Thank you. One of the things that kickstarted our Pawnee Seed Preservation Project was just the elders at the time around 1997 remembering the prayers and remembering the reverence that we held for plants. And so, just that thought alone is huge, is that what might take us 30 minutes to an hour to plant with mechanical tools today, our women, planted with their own technologies back then. And so some of the children, youth, and families and descendants of those elder women who asked for the seeds to come back home to us, they are aware in that seed memory that we have that knowledge system. And it's so important for us to not forget how we started, and excited as we are to get a new tool or implement that will enhance our growing practices. It's still just as important to record the thoughts and prayers and feelings behind how those plants came to be. And so for us, that pertains to our creation story, that pertains to songs and ceremony related to when we plant, how we plant, and when we're harvesting. We're a little disconnected from the language, but that's one thing, going back to your previous question, I hope to introduce to our children and our tribal youth and our neighboring youth, and because our communities are intermingled, is that as they approach the river, they should call her by her name. As they approach the creek, they should call her, acknowledge her by her name. I know that that's how our Wajaji people down here are acknowledged when they go to the afterlife, is to hear their name in their language. So I think that along with being water protectors and climate aware citizens and citizen scientists, we should also be speaking the languages so that we know the language of the scientists, but we also know the language that led our culture and ceremonies. So.
Milvian or Kara, do you all have efforts? Do you have efforts happening with preserving Indigenous knowledge from your elders?
Well, we just got funded by USDA to do a regenerative agriculture project, and we're going to be inviting, with COVID-19 and social distancing, we were hoping to have Louise Benally and Patuch come and visit with us here to share, but we're going to be doing an independent documentary film with Farmer's Footprint. And so that was one way that we felt to be able to address our concerns with our water quality, and to have those elders to be able to come and share with our other young ones on the East Coast the impact that they had from the uranium mining and from the water and the arsenic in the water sources, that, you know, these things, once they're damaged, you know, you really can't undamage them. And so that it's important that we stay vigil, you know, in protecting Mother Earth and protecting the water. And so those are the stories that we wanted to capture. And hopefully in the independent film, we'll be able to do that and to share it broadly.
Thank you. Thank you. Milvian?
I also wanted to share that for us it's very important to recover our seeds, especially learn how to plant them, because this is a knowledge that is being forgotten, and people are becoming dependent on the seeds from the companies, and that's the reason why we have decided to recover the knowledge about native and Creole seeds. But also we need to save the knowledge of the grandmothers, the grandfathers. When there's a lot of rain, we go out to see what kinds of plants come out, are surviving to the rain. And those are plants that do not appear every single year. They come out in moments of crisis. So when there's a lot of drought, we need to identify which are those plants that are coming out, and that nature is teaching us and is giving us so we can have life. So that kind of knowledge is truly important. We need to identify, we have to ask grandmothers, fathers, what's the name of those plants and those things. In my family, we had a very difficult time. We did not have any food to eat. And in the field, we found a plant that is called coulage. And it doesn't grow all the time in the rainy season or in the drought season, in the regular seasons, but only when there is a lot of drought, that's when those plants come out. So nature is very giving. It gives us care, gives us food, and we have learned that from our grandparents. And the methodology that we have is from peasant to peasant, and it's really working, very functional, because the farmers are teaching us their knowledge. And to be able to really learn it, we need to practice it. So we need to practice by doing. That way, that knowledge is not lost. And that's what we try to work on, in not only as women, but also with our families, because we also think that not only women have the responsibility to feed the family and to bring food, but all the family is important. Everybody has to be involved, even if you're really young, because that way has been taught to us by our grandparents. We need to keep going with intergenerational knowledge, because it can help us in moments of crisis.
Wow, thank you, Milvian. You brought up one point that I was thinking about, and thinking about a question, which is, you know, some have promoted GMO seeds as helping climate change, and you mentioned the seeds and traditional seeds. How would you say traditional seeds are better than GMO? And I'll ask all three of y'all to share briefly. Maybe Electa first.
Thank you for saying that. You know, I've heard varying opinions on this topic, and I think it's just because of our varied experiences and the foods we've been exposed to, and the knowledge systems that we've been also taught. I was just reading an article by Jules Pretty, and he said that those who support industrialized agriculture measure its success in narrow economic terms of food price and availability, and tend to ignore its costly unintended consequences to society and the environment. So I think that is the crux of these conversations we should continue to have. about GMOs, about ag policy, about local policy, like model food and agriculture codes, which communities can implement in this federal system. But I would like to see how we can also look at the human rights framework of how to protect our seeds and how to acknowledge them as sentient beings.
Thank you. Kara?
Yes. You know, GMO, genetically modified, and oftentimes people kind of look at that and don't really, you know, dig deep into what that is. And oftentimes the example that I like to use is when you're talking genetically modified, it's like a strawberry. It's very different than a hybrid. And when you start playing around with the genetics of plants, it can be very dangerous, almost mad scientist level. And so with strawberries, there was talk about taking a gene from a zebrafish, an Arctic fish that could survive in Arctic temperatures, freezing waters, and put it into the genetic makeup, the DNA of a strawberry, so that the strawberries could survive a frost. And so, you know, what would the impact of that be upon, you know, the strawberry and things like, you know, that long term? And that's the genetic play around. And yeah, the farmers might be able to get a longer crop. But I say to people, it's very alarming as a farmer, as a mother, you know, when I go to the grocery and I buy apples, I don't know if it's a conventional apple or if it's a GMO apple. But I can tell you, if you buy an apple and you take it home and within 30 to 60 days, that apple's not turning brown and it's not beginning to rot, more than likely it is a GMO apple. And so if it doesn't rot and create those antioxidants, what is it doing within your body? And so those are the kind of things and why we have been pushing for labeling, the right to know in our food system if we are actually consuming products that are made with genetically modified products.
Thank you, Kara. We've seemed to have lost Milvian for a moment, but hopefully she'll be joining us back soon. And so I wanted to shift gears because we're coming towards the end. There's a question here about resources and books. I'll ask if both Electa and Kara, if you would just write some of those maybe in the chat, because I have another question that I want to lead off or have us come to wrap up some. What is the most exciting thing about your food reclamation, seed reclamation, or land reclamation work that you would like to share with others? And second to that, if you had an opportunity to tell descendants of colonizers or descendants of settlers of what they could do to support your work, what would you tell them? Kara, how about you go first?
Okay, I think what's exciting about the food reclamation work that we're doing now is we're actually growing hemp. And, you know, a lot of people think of hemp and they kind of jump to marijuana, but hemp is a very good food source. It's a good source of protein and it's a good source for oils. And you can also make milk, hemp butter with it. And so I thought, you know, as Garari people, the hemp gatherers, that was very exciting for us to be able to go back and to look at growing things that were more sustainable and indigenous and healthy in our communities. And if I could go back and speak to those colonizers and the settlers when they're coming, I would say to them, do not displace our people because we need to remain connected on the land. And what they found and what they're finding now is to go back to our practices that we're having to look back to indigenous foodways for means of survival and looking, like I said, out to Louise and to Patuch's in Acoma, because they've been in areas with drought. They've been in areas where they had to look for alternate ways to grow and to forage for food. And so those ways are coming back to the people, and we need to make sure that we in our generations and future generations don't continue to displace our people from the land with overdevelopment, because we need access to be able to gather our plants and to make our food and medicine.
Thank you. So we got word that Milvian is on the line with us, even if we can't see her, she's still with us in the group. So Milvian, I wanted to ask of you, you know, what is one of the exciting things you want to share about the food reclamation work or the land reclamation work that you're doing? And what would you tell descendants of settlers and colonizers to do to support what your work is?
There are several things that we are doing in the indigenous communities. We are reclaiming the lands that that have belonged to us forever, and we are also taking this to the courts so we can recover the administration of our territories, because in the name of development they are cutting forest, and this is affecting the water. There are several transnational corporations that bring cables and wiring to the communities, and what we are doing is we are reclaiming the lands. We're taking these cases to the courts. In my case, I'm part of the Council of Ancestral Authorities in my community, and we are doing some research, and we are trying to demonstrate that our people was already here before the Spanish, and that the territory has always been ours, and the municipal authorities have appropriated the administration of the territory when it is in the indigenous peoples who have to decide on the territory. And we are trying to take this to the courts so we can reclaim our lands. And in terms of the seeds, what I wanted to say is that our peoples have always worked with the seeds. They have never manipulated them genetically, but they have tried to improve them and adapt them to the different seasons, to the cold, to the heat, to the drought, to the rain, and they have always worked. So the seeds can adapt naturally to the climate. And in terms of the descendants of the colonizers, I would tell them that there is no one world vision of the world or world vision. There is a world that is full with development ideas, economic growth, and all kinds of things. But there are other ways of seeing life. And those ways of seeing life come from original people or indigenous peoples. And it is important to respect those ways of seeing life, those ways of reproducing life and creating relationships among beings, and the importance of seeing ourselves horizontally. And if we're alive today, it's thanks to the struggle, resistance of the peoples, and they are not necessarily are going to be saving peoples, but they are part of the effort, and they have to respect ourselves, our territories, and see us with respect, not from the white supremacy, the kind of supremacy that is heterosexual. The West thinks that they know everything and that indigenous peoples don't know anything, but we have survived for thousands of years, and they have to see us in an equal plane. And if they want to support us, the first support is respect us, respect our knowledge, and let's fight, struggle together, because this world, we all deserve to live in it with dignity, but also not only us, but also nature.
Thank you, Milvian. Electa, I want to ask you the same thing. Like, what is one of the things you're excited about, either in the food reclamation work? You've started to mention some of these before, and or land reclamation work. And what would your recommendation be to settlers, colonizers, descendants of colonizers, who want to help and be supportive?
I appreciate that question, and I had read it earlier and had kind of pinned it for myself just to think on. I think land back, which we often read and hear and see, and as Indigenous people, we hold it up and we're very proud of it and we understand what that means. But for those of us who might not be Indigenous people or who have not been displaced from our homelands, just the act of bequeathing your land back to Indigenous peoples, either the ones that were displaced or the ones that occupy those territories now, is a way to practice your actions and the character behind your actions. And so I heard Milvian talk earlier about the energy and the relationship between us and plants and us and waterways and us and our climate. And I believe with this Indigenous knowledge reclamation and all these conversations, we're also going to see the health of the land and hopefully the slowdown of that rapid climate change that we've seen. And so there's nothing wrong with land back, but along with land back, there's also policy and education that will continue not only for our generation, but the generations behind us so that history does not repeat itself in that way.
Thank you. That was a pretty concise list and useful. And so I'm being anxious right now because we're so close to the end, and I feel like there's so much more to like dig into and get into with each of you. It's been such an honor and blessing to share this space with you. And just in the last couple of minutes, maybe this is not the right thing. We'll see if it works. I'm going to offer each of you one question that you could ask one of the other panelists that maybe you want to know of the women that you're sharing space with here now. So it might be putting you on the spot, but Kara.
I'd like to ask Electa with their seed saving, if they're doing it in clay jars or how they're storing their seed bank.
Good question, thank you. My mentor, Aunt Deb Echohawk, she has actually been brought seeds from, that came down from our walk from Nebraska in the 1870s, from Nebraska to Oklahoma. And some of the families had been storing at their homes, in their closets, in the baseboards, different places, our seed from home. And they were storing it, from pictures I've seen, in the big old pickle jars, which is very, close to home for Indian country because we love pickles. But yeah, that was one thing I'd seen is these ancient, I say ancient, but at least 200-year-old ears of corn that had been brought down and appreciated and held and revered, and they were protected by a pickle jar. So that's a little bit of what we've done. I try to ask our newcomers into the seed project to not put them in plastic bins, but sometimes we have to because that's the vessel that we have right now. It would be nice to have a clay pot. I could also see some hemp type storage in the future too.
Thank you. Electa, how about you ask the next question since you were just going, and maybe you have a question from one of the panelists.
Thank you. Yes. So Milvian, I have a question for you. I have a dear friend that lives close to Mexico City, and she walked up here in a women's march, outside up in Oklahoma City around the Capitol. And she said that the movements at home are much different than she sees the movements up here, because what we talked about earlier, that intersection of feminism and Indigenous thought and different groups and power struggles. So I just wanted to ask you, can you tell me a strength of the movements of the women from your home country? A strength or a tactic?
So for us, it's really important to speak from our own voice, because many times our movements, especially Indigenous women's movements, some women that are white or feminist or mixed, they think that someone else has to speak about us or for us. But that's why we say that we have our own voice. We need to bring our own plans, our own strategies that is more genuine than someone else speaking on our behalf. So to also recover our dignity, our anger, to position ourselves in our dignity, not as victims. We are not victimizing ourselves. We are fighting from a space of dignity. And this is something very important, and this makes so that our movements are sustainable, and that there's more a feeling that is our movement, that we feel that it's our movement.
Thank you, Milvian. Now you have an opportunity to ask a question of one of the panelists, as you all three are the experts. Maybe you want to ask something of one of the others.
Yes, I want to ask Kara. How do you confront your peoples, your collective? How do you confront institutional racism and social racism?
That's a very good question. Because racism and colorism, you know, even the class system is very prevalent here. As I spoke about, even with my tribe being non-federally recognized. And so, you know, we have to come at it from a place that, you know, we may be different, but we're all equal. And the thing is that we all have something to contribute. And I think that when we begin to respect one another for who we are as a people, that racism has no place. Racism is a tactic to divide us. There is no superiority. There are no groups or tribes or nations that should be above the others. It should be equal and fair, and we're all relatives, and we should all be taking care of each other. And within the social side of things, and even within racism within corporate America, we just filed a boycott against John Deere because of the way that the farmers, especially Black farmers, were being treated in the local dealerships. And so the thing is, we have economic power, and we have to speak truth to power. And even when people don't want to hear and have those tough conversations, you still have to press through the conversations, because confrontation sometimes can bring resolution. And so that's what I would say, is that it may get a little uncomfortable to have conversations about racism and social injustice. But we have to have those conversations in order to bring resolution.
Wow, what a good way to come to wrapping this up. I wish we had more time and more days to do this, but we're also way into the evening for some. So I thank each of you for your time, your expertise, your passion, your heart. Oh, I just think like this just feels really good. And there's many people who have already commented about how they have felt impacted by what you have shared. But we are going to wrap up for the evening. I want to also thank our interpretation team. You didn't get to see many of them, but you also got to see Paula, who was interpreting in sign language. Also, language justice is important to us so that we can have as many people be able to access and engage in this discussion with us as possible. And I also want to thank our IEN support team, both Simone and Jennifer. Jennifer, who is helping with some of the tech stuff in the back. But I thank you all and then I thank all the participants and attendees and people who came to listen in and ask questions and hang with us until the bitter end, even though we went over a few minutes. But thank you all, and Blessings for everyone and good night.